December fog clings to the Blue Ridge Mountains like something that won't let go. Through the mist, a chateau rises, 4 acres of roof, limestone walls the color of old money, 250 rooms echoing with silence. Servants' bells still hang in the basement, numbered 1 through 43. The wine cellar holds 10,000 bottles in the dark. Paintings pulled from Venetian palaces watch empty hallways. George Washington, Vanderbilt II, built this place believing that beauty could insulate him from the world outside. He was wrong. Was this the pinnacle of American ambition, or its most expensive mistake? The Vanderbilt name meant railroad tracks stretching coast to coast, steamships crossing oceans, money so vast it bent cities to its will. Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore, built that empire with calculated ruthlessness. When he died in 1877, he left $105 million. In today's money, that's over $2, $7 billion. He gave almost all of it to one son, William Henry Vanderbilt, who doubled it in 8 years through railroad consolidation and strategic manipulation of stock prices. William's children, the 3rd generation, inherited fortunes most people couldn't spend in 10 lifetimes. They scattered across America and Europe, building palaces, collecting art, marrying into European aristocracy, spending with the casual certainty of people who believed the money would never end. George was different from his brothers. While they bought yachts and built palaces in Newport, competing for social dominance through conspicuous consumption, he collected books, not casually, obsessively. First editions, rare manuscripts, medieval illuminated texts that cost thousands each. By his 20s, he owned 20,000 volumes, a library that required a full-time curator just to catalogue, a collection that rivaled those of major universities. He spoke 8 languages fluently, French, German, Italian, Spanish among them, and could read Latin and Greek well enough to appreciate classical texts in their original forms. He traveled Europe studying architecture, sketching chateaux along the Loire Valley, walking the gardens at Versailles with measuring tape and notebook, recording proportions, noting details that architects thought no patron would ever notice or care about. His notebooks filled with technical observations, buttress angles, window placements, how light entered rooms at different times of day. His family called him the scholar, the quiet one, the one who preferred libraries to boardrooms, who could spend hours examining a single painting, discussing brushwork and composition and provenance with dealers and curators, who cared more about whether a book was a true first edition than about whether a business venture would turn profit, who seemed, to his more pragmatic siblings, almost willfully impractical in his interests and investments. But even scholars need empires, and George had inherited the means to build one. The question was what kind of empire a scholar builds when money is no object and the world is open. In 1888, George visited Asheville, North Carolina. He'd been traveling through the South, supposedly for his health. He had respiratory issues, and doctors recommended mountain air. The Blue Ridge region reminded him of the Alps, of the European countryside he'd sketched in notebooks. The air seemed cleaner than New York's coal smoke haze, the light softer, the pace slower. Local developers courted him aggressively, showing him land, promising privacy, suggesting that a man of his means deserved a proper country estate befitting his station. They showed him a ridge overlooking the French Broad River. Mountains rolled away in every direction, morning fog gathered in valleys like something alive. George stood there, looking out, and saw not wilderness, but potential. He saw gardens terraced down hillsides. He saw a house, not a cottage, not a hunting lodge, but something substantial, something permanent. He bought 2,000 acres. Then he kept buying, week by week, tract by tract, assembling parcels from farmers happy to sell land that had never made them rich. By the time he finished, he owned 125,000 acres, nearly 200 square miles of forest, river, farmland, mountain ridges. The largest private landholding in the eastern United States, larger than many European principalities. Land enough to get lost in for days. He told friends he wanted a country retreat, a place to read, to hunt, to escape the social obligations of New York's Fifth Avenue, a place where he could live quietly, surrounded by beauty, insulated from the industrial chaos remaking America. His friends thought it was a phase. Rich men often bought land, built lodges, played at being country squires for a season or two before returning to the city. They assumed George would tire of the mountains, that wilderness would lose its charm once winter came, that he'd build something modest and move on. They were wrong. George hired Richard Morris Hunt, architect to the Astors and the Rockefellers, the man who designed palaces for families who thought in dynasties. Hunt had studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, won competitions across Europe, built for clients who measured success in centuries, not years. He understood monuments. He understood how to make stone speak wealth. In 1888, George visited Asheville, North Carolina. The mountains reminded him of the Alps. The air seemed cleaner than New York's coal smoke haze. Local developers courted him, promising land at good prices, showing him vistas where morning light broke through ridges like prophecy. He bought 2,000 acres. Then he kept buying. By the time construction began, he owned 125,000 acres, nearly 200 square miles of forest, river, farmland. The largest private landholding in the eastern United States. He told friends he wanted a country retreat, a place to read, to hunt, to escape. He hired Richard Morris Hunt, architect to the Astors and the Rockefellers, to design something worthy of a Vanderbilt. Hunt had studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, won competitions across Europe, built palaces for clients who thought in centuries, not seasons. George showed him sketches of the Château de Blois, the Château de Chambord, 16th-century French Renaissance, the architecture of kings who ruled by divine right, who built for eternity, who measured success by how many centuries their buildings survived. He wanted that same permanence, that same weight. Hunt said he could do better. He could give George something no one in America had ever seen. The plans he delivered in 1889 showed a house of 178,926 square feet. To put that in perspective, the average American home at the time measured around 1,200 square feet. George's house would be nearly 150 times larger. 4 floors, each designed for specific purposes. 43 bathrooms when most American households still used outhouses. 65 fireplaces because central heating, though available, wasn't grand enough, wasn't theatrical enough, didn't crackle and glow the way George imagined wealth should. A banquet hall with a 70-foot ceiling, tall enough to swallow a 4-story building. A library designed to hold 23,000 books. Shelves climbing 2 stories. A spiral staircase in black walnut. Skylights flooding the room with natural light. An indoor swimming pool tiled in Art Nouveau patterns, fed by heated water pumped from the estate's own reservoir. A bowling alley in the basement. An observatory on the roof for studying stars. A winter garden enclosed in glass where tropical plants could survive North Carolina winters. And the gardens, George insisted on gardens. Not flower beds, but landscapes. He hired Frederick Law Olmsted, the man who'd designed Central Park, who'd shaped Boston's emerald necklace, who understood that parks were democratic spaces where rich and poor could walk the same paths. But Biltmore's gardens wouldn't be democratic. They'd be private, exclusive, visible only to invited guests. Olmsted would shape hundreds of acres into terraced gardens, forested paths, cultivated wilderness, designed to look natural while requiring constant maintenance. The budget Hunt presented was $3 million. George, looking at the plans, at the scale, at the ambition sketched across dozens of blueprint pages, nodded. 3 million seemed reasonable for what he wanted, what he needed. It would eventually cost 5 million. In today's money, adjusted for inflation, that's $189 million. To build a house, one house for one man, his wife, and eventually one daughter, George said yes before the ink dried. He had the money. More importantly, he had the will. While his brothers were building comparatively modest estates, summer cottages of 30 or 40 rooms, George was designing a palace, something that would outlast him, something that would make the Vanderbilt name mean more than just railroads and money. Something that would prove he was more than an heir, more than a checkbook with legs. He was building immortality, and he didn't care what it cost. What came next required an industrial operation disguised as construction. Hunt needed limestone, massive blocks from Indiana quarries hundreds of miles away. George's engineers built a 3-mile private railroad spur connecting to the Southern Railway main line. That railroad alone cost more than most mansions. They built a kiln producing 10,000 bricks per day, running continuously for 6 years. A woodworking factory with 40 carpenters and steam-powered machinery churned out custom millwork, door frames, window casings, wainscoting, each piece numbered and catalogued. They dammed the Swannanoa River to power a sawmill, built a power plant for electricity, constructed stables, blacksmith shops, storage sheds, and housing for workers, a village called Best. Simple frame structures, no plumbing, heated by coal stoves. This would take years, so men brought families, settling into a company town where everything depended on George's continued spending. 1,000 men worked the site at peak construction. 60 master stonemasons from Europe, because American workers didn't have training for the intricate carving Hunt's design required. Gargoyles, cornices, decorative friezes that required years of apprenticeship to execute properly. Italian artisans for plasterwork and frescoes, techniques not taught in American trade schools, but most were local men who needed wages, mountain families who took whatever work was offered because options were limited. They worked 10-hour days minimum, 6 days a week, 52 weeks yearly. No vacation, no sick days, no unemployment insurance. Get hurt and you're replaced. Get sick and your family starves. Die and nobody compensates your widow. That was the bargain. That was always the bargain for men who built monuments for others. Winter work was brutal. Mornings started in darkness, temperatures below freezing, fingers numbing within minutes of starting work. Mixing mortar in those conditions meant it could freeze before you used it, meaning wasted materials, wasted time, wasted effort. Men developed techniques. Warming water before mixing, working faster, adding more lime to prevent freezing. But technique only helped so much when you're working outdoors in North Carolina winters that could drop to single digits. Summer brought different miseries. The humidity made breathing feel like drowning. Men sweated through shirts within an hour, dehydrated despite drinking from communal buckets that tasted of rust and whatever bacteria multiplied in water sitting warm all day. Heat exhaustion was common, men fainting, stumbling, making mistakes because exhaustion dulled reactions. And mistakes on construction sites kill. The scaffolding alone was dangerous. Wooden planks supported by rope and hope, swaying in wind, creaking under weight, climbing higher each month as walls rose. Men walked those planks carrying tools, materials, climbing ladders that weren't secured to anything solid. No safety harnesses existed, no regulations required them. You held on, or you fell. Simple as that. Some didn't hold on well enough. The machinery was worse. Steam-powered saws with no guards, capable of removing fingers or hands faster than you could pull back. Hoists lifting multi-ton blocks, operated by men who judged weight and balance by eye, who signaled with shouts over noise that drowned out everything. One miscommunication, one misjudged weight, one frayed cable, and someone died. Local newspapers mentioned accidents occasionally, brief items buried on inside pages. Worker injured in construction accident at Vanderbilt Estate. Body recovered from river near Biltmore construction site. The details were always vague. The names sometimes included, sometimes not. The circumstances described as unfortunate or accidental, words that suggested nobody's fault, just bad luck, the kind of thing that happens in dangerous work. But accidents aren't evenly distributed. They happen more when men are exhausted, when equipment isn't maintained, when profit matters more than safety, when workers are expendable because there's always another man willing to take your place. The estate pushed deadlines. Hunt wanted progress. George wanted his house, and workers paid the price of that impatience with their bodies, sometimes their lives. The accident rate isn't recorded officially. Payroll records exist because accounting demanded them. But injuries, deaths, those numbers don't appear in archives. No legal requirement existed to track them. No insurance companies demanded reports. No labor unions forced accountability. Unions were still illegal in most contexts, considered criminal conspiracies by courts that sided with owners. So when a man fell from scaffolding, when someone got caught in machinery, when illness swept through Best Village, it went unrecorded beyond county death certificates that listed cause but not context, that noted accidental death or drowning or injury sustained in fall, without explaining circumstances, without placing blame, without suggesting anything could have been prevented. The silence was structural and deliberate. You couldn't build something like Biltmore and admit it was dangerous. That would attract attention, invite regulation, suggest that maybe wealth on this scale carried costs beyond the financial. Better to keep accidents quiet, to bury dead workers quickly, to move on to the next task without dwelling on casualties. The question nobody asked in the ledgers, nobody discussed in planning meetings, nobody raised when inspecting progress was how much a man's body could take before it broke. How many hours of heavy labor before backs gave out permanently? How many years of exposure before lungs filled with stone dust and stopped working? How many winters working wet and cold before pneumonia took hold? The House knows those answers, even if the records don't. Every stone was placed by hands that bled. Every floor was laid by men whose knees ground down to bone. Every wall was built by backs that bent until they couldn't straighten anymore. The beauty is real. So is the cost. By 1892, Biltmore House began to take shape. The steel frame rose first, Hunt's innovation despite George's preference for traditional walls. Men worked at heights without safety harnesses, walking beams barely wider than their boots, riveting together metal bones that would support tons of limestone. Walls climbed slowly, block by massive block, each piece cut to fit precisely. Hoisting required coordinated teams operating pulleys and counterweights. One mistake could crush a man. Several did. The roof lines spread outward. Dormers, 65 chimneys, copper flashing turning green in humid mountain air. Inside, rooms multiplied. The winter garden beneath its arched glass ceiling. The tapestry gallery built around 16th century Flemish weavings, walls constructed to exact dimensions so fabric fit perfectly. The billiard room in Santo Domingo mahogany that took months to install, each piece hand-fitted, grain matched across seams. The banquet hall was its own engineering challenge. A 70-foot ceiling requiring hidden support structures, steel beams disguised behind plaster, acoustic calculations for sound in that vast volume. The breakfast room got custom-mixed sunflower yellow pigments, hand-stenciled ceiling patterns copied from a Venetian palazzo. 2 artists, 6 weeks, working overhead from scaffolding. George walked the site obsessively, carrying blueprints, checking measurements, demanding perfection guests would never notice. Tiffany glass for the conservatory, carved stone mantels from demolished French chateaux, bronze door handles from commissioned molds, floor tiles from Italy, bathroom fixtures from England, light fixtures from Bavaria. His friends thought he'd lost his mind. His mother called it wasteful. George didn't care. He was building permanence, creating something immune to time and decay. He was building a tomb and calling it home. The scale becomes real in numbers. 178,926 square feet, 4 acres under one roof, 65 fireplaces burning 11,200 tons of coal yearly. That's 22 million pounds hauled by wagon, stored in basement bunkers, shoveled by men whose entire job was feeding flames. 43 bathrooms with hot and cold running water piped 3 miles from a reservoir. 15 miles of iron pipe. 24-hour steam pumps, porcelain tubs from European manufacturers, some hand-painted with florals. English toilet mechanisms because American plumbing couldn't match European precision. 8 miles of brass pipe for heating, snaking through walls and floors. Central boilers generating steam, maintaining pressure. A full-time engineer who understood thermodynamics, pressure gauges, valve systems, mechanical rooms guests never saw. Electric lights before most of Asheville could afford kerosene. Custom fixtures holding Edison bulbs that cost $1 each when workers earned 50 cents daily. A generator building with its own staff, the kitchen designed for industrial production, rotisseries for whole pigs, clockwork-driven, an ice house storing 20 tons cut from frozen ponds, packed in sawdust. Ammonia-cooled refrigeration requiring a full-time engineer. Walk-in pantries organized by temperature and access frequency, separate pastry kitchen, china pantry with service for 103 patterns, basement storage for 6 months of provisions, shelves holding preserved foods, root vegetables in sand, hanging hams, aging cheese wheels. The house could withstand a siege. 80 indoor servants at full operation. Teams of maids, each with specific duties, bedrooms, public spaces, silver polishing. A French-trained head chef, sous chefs, prep cooks, scullery maids. Butlers, footmen, valets, housekeepers supervising work schedules, laundresses using industrial mangles, chambermaids who disappeared before guests woke. 40 gardeners maintaining the illusion of natural beauty. 10 men full-time in greenhouses growing orchids and tropical fruits year-round. 20 tending livestock, horses, dairy cows, chickens, pigs for self-sufficiency. Beyond them, hundreds more, foresters, gamekeepers, farmhands, drivers, mechanics on permanent payroll because things broke constantly and contractors were miles away. Over 300 people working simultaneously to support one family. Payroll was relentless. Even when George didn't visit for months, staff had to remain. You couldn't mothball a house this size, abandon it one season and mold claims it, rust seizes pipes, vermin move in. The house demanded constant attention just to prevent collapse. It always has. It still does. But by the time the house opened on Christmas Eve 1895, the world had already begun to shift beneath the Vanderbilts' feet. George invited family and close friends for the first Christmas. They arrived by private rail car, rode up the 3-mile approach road Olmsted designed to gradually reveal the house. Even Vanderbilts gasped at the scale. Inside, rooms still smelled of fresh paint and varnish. The banquet hall held an oak table, seating 64, imported in pieces because no doorway admitted it whole. Crystal chandeliers hung from the 70-foot ceiling. The library's shelves were still being filled with George's 23,000 volumes. Fireplaces roared in every major room, burning cords of hardwood hauled through basement tunnels by servants. That first holiday cost more than most families earned yearly. Coal, 2 tons consumed during the week. Food, imported wines worth more than workers' weekly wages. Roasted meats, pastries requiring imported butter, cream, sugar, chocolate costing dollars per pound when workers earned pennies per hour. Guests drank from Bohemian crystal, ate off Paris-painted china, slept in beds draped with lion silk. Bathrooms offered hot running water, thick towels changed daily, imported toiletries. Even toilet paper was imported. Downstairs, servants ate simpler meals at bolted wooden tables. They ate well by working-class standards, steady food, mattered when hunger was common. but they ate separately, invisibly, in basement spaces guests never saw. They slept in unheated attic rooms, warmed only by residual heat rising from below. They woke before dawn to light fires in bedrooms where employers still slept. They worked 16-hour days during Christmas, standing for hours until bodies screamed for rest. Wages ranged from $8 to $20 monthly, depending on position. $8 for 30 days' work, 26 cents daily. Set against George's $5 million house, against $40 coal bills and $100 wine selections, those wages revealed a distance between floors that measured more than just architecture. The distance between floors measured entire universes of experience. George married Edith Stuyvesant Dresser in Paris in June 1898. She was 25, from an old New York family whose money had run thin. They met through mutual friends, corresponded for months, married quietly at the American Embassy. After a honeymoon touring Italy, George brought her to Biltmore. She saw a house requiring constant vigilance to prevent collapse. The roof leaked, water finding gaps seeping into attics, staining plaster ceilings. Heating systems broke down, pipes froze in the north wing, radiators failed. Wallpaper peeled, wiring sparked, windows stuck, doors warped, stones cracked, paint faded. Wood floors needed refinishing, marble required sealing. The house aged from the moment it finished, fighting its own existence. And the cost, $6,000 monthly in basic operations, $72,000 yearly. In today's money, nearly $2,300,000 annually, just keeping doors open. That didn't count repairs, improvements George insisted on, seasonal staff wages, property taxes on 125,000 acres, or his compulsive acquisitions, rare books arriving monthly, paintings from London and Paris dealers. The estate produced some income: timber sales from managed forests, dairy products, tenant farm crops, maybe 10 to 15,000 annually on good years. The math was simple and brutal. Biltmore consumed $5 for every dollar it produced. You couldn't sustain that even with Vanderbilt money. Eventually it would run out. Edith saw this immediately. She'd grown up counting pennies, understanding budgets. Biltmore's books showed catastrophe approaching. George saw the same books and saw nothing alarming. He had investments, family holdings paying dividends. The money would always be there. Edith didn't argue. She was 25, newly married, navigating a family with more money than sense about preserving it. She kept the household running, managed staff, hosted parties, and watched money flow out monthly, yearly, endlessly. They had one child, Cornelia, born in 1900. George was thrilled, an heir for Biltmore. Edith looked at baby Cornelia and wondered what kind of inheritance this really was. By 1900, the national mood toward men like George had soured. Progressives called them robber barons. Journalists exposed how fortunes were made through monopoly, exploitation, political corruption. Newspapers ran exposés about industrial accidents, child labor, wages kept low, while owners built palaces. The public made connections. Fifth Avenue mansions and tenement slums weren't separate. They were opposite ends of the same system. Biltmore's wealth came from railroad monopolies charging farmers extortionate rates, steamship lines packing immigrants like cargo, land speculation and stock manipulation. George tried positioning himself differently. He implemented scientific forestry on Biltmore's land, created model farms, opened a school for local children, funded an Asheville hospital. These weren't empty gestures. But philanthropy doesn't erase the foundational math. $5 million for a house. Average American worker earned $460 yearly. You could employ 10,000 workers for a year with what George spent on limestone and chandeliers. The question hung unanswered. What gives one man the right to so much while others have so little? George never answered. The money was his, legally. He could spend it how he chose. This logic, once unquestioned, was beginning to sound hollow. Then, in March 1914, something went catastrophically wrong. George was in Washington for forestry program meetings. He felt abdominal pain during dinner, dismissed it as indigestion. The pain intensified overnight. By morning, he was feverish, unable to stand upright. A doctor diagnosed appendicitis. In 2024, this is routine. In 1914, if the appendix had ruptured, it was a death sentence. George's had. Peritonitis spread, infection through the abdominal cavity, bacteria in bloodstream, sepsis beginning. Emergency surgery was attempted. They removed the ruptured appendix, flushed the cavity, sutured him back together. This was 1914's best medicine. No antibiotics. Those wouldn't exist for another 28 years. No blood transfusions, no IV fluids, just surgery and hope. George deteriorated rapidly. Infection was systemic. His fever wouldn't break. Abdomen swelled. Kidneys failed. Heart struggled to pump poisoned blood. On March 6, 1914, at 10:15 p.m., George Washington Vanderbilt II died in a Washington hospital. He was 51. He'd lived less than 20 years in the house he spent 6 building. Edith received the telegram at Biltmore. Her husband dead. Cornelia, 14, orphaned. And the estate, now hers to manage alone. The will revealed the problem in stark numbers. George had spent lavishly but saved poorly, investing in beauty rather than in income-generating assets. His portion of the Vanderbilt fortune, once immense, had dwindled through years of construction, operation, acquisition. The house had consumed millions. The operations consumed thousands monthly. The art collection, while valuable, was illiquid. You couldn't pay staff wages with a human Brandt. He left Edith the house, all 178,126 square feet of it. The remaining land, still vast at 125,000 acres. Some investments, mostly in railroads and real estate, that were generating modest returns. And debt. Operational debt accumulated over years of spending more than the estate earned. Property taxes on land that sprawled across 3 counties. Wages owed to staff who couldn't simply be dismissed. You couldn't run Biltmore with a skeleton crew, not if you wanted to prevent immediate collapse. The math was simple and unforgiving. The estate required constant cash infusions just to keep functioning. Without George's income from other Vanderbilt holdings, income that had died with him, the equation didn't work. Edith could maybe keep things running for a year, perhaps 2 if she stretched every dollar. But eventually, inevitably, the money would run out. Her choices were limited and none were good. She could sell everything, auction the art, liquidate the land, close the house, walk away with cash and freedom, and the certainty that George's dream would die within months. Or she could try to save it, knowing that saving it would consume the rest of her life, that success was unlikely, that she might sacrifice everything and lose anyway. Edith chose to fight. Not for sentiment, though she'd loved George. Not for pride, though she had plenty. She fought because Cornelia deserved an inheritance, because the estate employed hundreds of families who'd lose everything if it closed, because something in her refused to let this monument collapse on her watch. She did what George never could. She made hard choices that recognized reality over romance. First, she sold land. Not all of it, but most of it. 87,000 acres went to the federal government for $5 an acre. $5. The land was worth $10, $15, maybe $20 an acre on the open market. But the open market moves slowly, requires patience, demands negotiation. Edith didn't have patience. She needed cash immediately, needed it to pay debts, taxes, operational costs that couldn't wait for better offers. That sale brought in $435,000, $500,000, minus fees and legal costs. It paid the most urgent debts, bought breathing room, prevented immediate bankruptcy, and it created what would become Pisgah National Forest, public land that any American could access, forests that would be preserved rather than logged to exhaustion. George's vision of a vast private domain shrank to 8,000 acres overnight. The estate that had sprawled across 3 counties now fit within boundaries you could walk in a day. But it survived. And sometimes survival requires amputation. Edith cut staff ruthlessly. The indoor servant count dropped from 80 to 40. Gardeners were reduced from 40 to 20. She closed entire wings of the house to save on heating. The north wing went cold, rooms sealed, furniture covered, spaces abandoned. She trimmed the gardens back to what essential staff could maintain. She sold artwork, not the masterpieces that defined the collection, but enough pieces to raise funds without gutting what made Biltmore worth preserving. She negotiated with creditors, stretching payment schedules, promising future payments, leveraging the Vanderbilt name's remaining cachet to buy time. She refinanced loans at whatever rates she could get. She fought tax assessors over property valuations, hired lawyers to argue that assessed values were inflated, that a house you couldn't sell had no real market value. And she raised Cornelia in the house her father built, teaching her daughter lessons George never learned. That beauty costs more than money, that wealth without income is just illusion, that survival requires constant compromise between what you want and what you can afford. The 1920s brought brief, illusory relief. The economy boomed. The stock market climbed month after month, making everyone feel wealthy whether they were or not. Tourism grew as Americans discovered automobile travel, as middle-class families could afford vacations that once belonged only to the rich. Asheville transformed into a resort destination. Hotels sprouting like mushrooms, golf courses carved from farmland, mountain lodges catering to northerners fleeing summer heat. The city's population tripled. Property values soared. Developers pitched schemes that sounded reasonable in the boom's euphoria, luxury subdivisions, mountaintop resorts, infrastructure projects that would make Asheville the Switzerland of America. Edith participated carefully in this boom. She opened parts of Biltmore to select visitors, charging modest fees for garden tours. The house remained private. She and Cornelia still lived there, still needed privacy. But the grounds became a draw. People paid $1 to walk Olmsted's gardens, to see the greenhouse collections, to glimpse the chateau from carefully curated viewpoints. The revenue helped. Not enough to make Biltmore profitable, but enough to reduce the monthly hemorrhage, enough to maintain what remained without selling more land or more art. Edith used tourism income to fund repairs, to keep systems running, to prevent the decay that waited patiently for any gap in vigilance. But Biltmore still consumed more than it produced. Each winter brought frozen pipes, roof damage from ice dams, heating bills that consumed thousands. Each spring revealed new rot in window frames, cracks in masonry that spread with each freeze-thaw cycle, leaks that multiplied like bacteria. The house was aging faster than they could repair it, fighting its own existence, demanding constant intervention just to prevent collapse. And then, October 1929 hit like a bomb nobody saw coming. The stock market collapsed. Not gradually, not with warning signs wise investors could have heeded. It collapsed suddenly, spectacularly, dragging the entire economy into the abyss. Banks failed by the thousands, vaults emptied, depositors losing life savings overnight. Fortunes evaporated as stock prices plummeted to fractions of their former values. Companies that had seemed eternal went bankrupt within weeks. Asheville's tourism economy imploded. The hotels that had sprouted in the 1920s boom went bankrupt. Keys turned over to creditors who couldn't find buyers at any price. Real estate development stopped mid-construction, half-built structures abandoned to weather and decay. Golf courses went unmaintained, fairways reverting to wilderness. Mountain lodges closed their doors. The city's population, which had tripled during the boom, began contracting as people left seeking work elsewhere. Unemployment soared, 25% nationally, higher in tourist-dependent towns. Breadlines formed. Soup kitchens opened, families lost homes, children went hungry. The certainty that had defined the 1920s, that prosperity would continue forever, that the boom would never end, shattered completely. The Vanderbilt investments, already strained by Edith's constant need to extract cash for Biltmore's operations, cratered in value. Stocks worth millions in 1928 were worth pennies in 1930. Railroad holdings that had generated steady dividends stopped paying entirely as freight traffic collapsed. Real estate that George had assumed would always appreciate became unsellable at any price. No one was buying property when they couldn't afford food. Suddenly, Edith faced a choice that wasn't really a choice. Sell Biltmore entirely. House, land, everything, for whatever price desperate times would bring, knowing she'd get far less than fair value, or find a way to make the estate pay for itself. She chose survival through transformation. In 1930, Edith Vanderbilt did something no Vanderbilt had ever done, something that would have horrified George, something that represented the complete inversion of everything Biltmore was built to be. She opened the house to the public. Not just the gardens, not just select viewpoints. She opened the house itself, the private rooms, the family spaces, the inner sanctum that George had built specifically to be separate from the world. For $1, about $19 today, any American could tour the first floor. They could walk through the banquet hall where Vanderbilts had entertained. They could see the library George had filled with rare books. They could stand in the winter garden and look up at glass ceilings designed to make you feel small. They could touch marble George had imported, walk on floors he'd specified, stare at paintings worth more than their houses. And they came. God, they came in droves. Thousands of people, many of them struggling through the Depression, scraping together dollars they could barely afford, paying to see how the other half had lived. Past tense, because everyone understood the era that built Biltmore was dead, that nobody was building palaces anymore, that this house represented a world that had passed. They drove up the approach road in Model Ts and beat-up Chevrolets. They arrived wearing their best clothes, not fine clothes, just the best they owned. Men in suits worn shiny at the elbows, women in dresses they'd made themselves, children with clean faces and combed hair, wide-eyed at the scale, the opulence, the sheer impossibility of one family owning all this. Tour guides led them through rooms with ropes keeping them from touching furniture, from sitting on chairs, from getting too close to art. The guides told stories about George's vision, about the years of construction, about the imported materials and European craftsmen. They talked about beauty and ambition and American achievement. They didn't talk about cost, about workers, about the distance between these marble floors and the dirt floor cabins where some visitors had grown up. It worked. The admission fees, modest as they were, brought steady income. Enough to pay skeleton staff. You couldn't show the house without guides, without people to open doors and light fires in select fireplaces and create the illusion that this place was maintained, cared for, worth preserving. Enough to maintain critical systems, heat enough to prevent pipes from freezing, repairs enough to prevent total collapse, enough to buy another year, another season, another chance to figure out how to make this impossible equation work. Biltmore became a museum of itself, a monument to an era that visitors could walk through for $1, could touch carefully through ropes, could photograph if they paid extra, could tell their grandchildren they'd seen. The transformation was complete. George's private refuge became America's public spectacle. His escape from the world became a destination for people seeking escape from Depression-era desperation, wanting a few hours to walk through rooms where money had been no object, where beauty had been the only goal, where someone had built something magnificent just because they could. But opening the house meant exposing its contradictions. Visitors asked questions tour guides couldn't always answer smoothly. How much did this cost? Who built it? How many people died during construction? What happened to the workers? Did the Vanderbilts pay fair wages? Why did one family need 250 rooms? The estate had no good answers to these questions. Records from the construction era were incomplete. Conveniently so, some might say. Accident reports, if they ever existed, had been lost or never filed. Wage records survived but revealed numbers that made modern visitors uncomfortable. $8 a month for grueling labor. Death certificates for workers existed in county records, scattered and incomplete, listing causes like accidental drowning or injuries sustained in fall, without elaborating on circumstances. Local historians found references to workers hurt in falls, crushed by machinery, killed in railroad accidents on the private line. But the numbers were scattered across multiple sources, never officially compiled, easy to dismiss as rumor or exaggeration. Some stories persisted anyway, passing through families whose great-grandfathers had worked the construction, tales of scaffolding collapses and cave-ins and machinery accidents that the estate never acknowledged. A stonemason who fell from fourth-floor scaffolding, his body carried away before other workers could gather, buried quickly with minimal ceremony. Laborers who drowned in the French Broad River during spring floods while hauling materials across temporary bridges. Illnesses that swept through Best Village, typhoid from contaminated water, pneumonia from winter exposure, infections that antibiotics would have cured if antibiotics had existed. The estate never memorialized them. No plaque lists their names, no monument marks where they fell. The official Biltmore story focused on Hunt's genius, Olmsted's vision, George's refined taste. The workers who actually built it remained invisible, just as George had designed them to be. World War II brought unexpected salvation, wrapped in irony too perfect to ignore. In 1942, with German bombs falling on London, with U-boats prowling the Atlantic, the National Gallery of Art in Washington needed to evacuate its most valuable paintings. They needed a location that was secure, climate-controlled, far from coasts where enemy submarines or bombers might strike. They needed somewhere with space to store hundreds of pieces, with environmental controls to prevent deterioration, with security to prevent theft. Biltmore offered its music room. The estate had space, needed money, and saw an opportunity. For the duration of the war, Rembrandts and Vermeers sat in a North Carolina chateau. Works by Raphael and Titian, paintings that represented the pinnacle of European art, were guarded by men earning wartime wages in a house built with railroad money, preserved in rooms designed to display a different collection entirely. The irony was exquisite. European masterpieces stored in an American copy of a European palace, protected by the wealth of a family who'd made their fortune moving people and goods with ruthless efficiency, now helping preserve culture from the destruction industrial warfare had made possible. After the war ended, the paintings went back to Washington. Biltmore remained, now fully committed to its new identity as tourist attraction. Edith had died in 1958, leaving the estate to Cornelia, who'd married John Francis Amherst Cecil, a British aristocrat who understood estates, understood preservation, understood that survival meant commercial operation. The family expanded tours progressively, opening more rooms, adding more content, marketing harder. They opened the gardens to ticket prices. They created seasonal events, Christmas at Biltmore, spring flower festivals, summer concerts on the lawn. They added restaurants, gift shops, wine tastings, anything that could generate revenue from people who'd paid to see the house. By the 1960s, Biltmore had become Asheville's largest employer. Hundreds of workers maintained the house, grounds, gardens. Tour guides led groups through the same halls where servants once worked invisible. Groundskeepers tended the same gardens Olmsted designed, following his plans preserved in archives, maintaining beauty for paying customers rather than private enjoyment. The wine cellar, once stocked for George's private consumption, became a commercial winery. The estate planted vineyards on land that had been forests, produced wines sold to tourists, created a revenue stream from grapes growing in soil that once supported the workers' village of Best. The transformation was complete and total. From private residence to public attraction, from family home to commercial enterprise, from George's escape to everyone's destination, for a price. The estate perfected the performance. Rooms were staged to look lived in but untouched, as if the Vanderbilts had just stepped out for a walk. Fires burned in select fireplaces during tours, suggesting warmth without wasting fuel. Flowers appeared in vases, fresh daily, giving life to spaces that hadn't seen permanent residents in decades. It was theatre, and it was profitable. George's great-grandson, William Cecil, took over management in the 1960s. He saw what Edith had known decades earlier. Biltmore could only survive by evolving beyond its original purpose. The days of private estates were dead, killed by income taxes and inheritance laws, and a society that no longer accepted extreme wealth without question. The choice was adapt or die. He added a winery first, turning the estate's agricultural roots into commercial venture. The climate proved surprisingly good for certain grape varieties, the elevation, the soil composition, the temperature variations. Within years, Biltmore wines were winning competitions, generating revenue independent of tour admissions. He built a luxury inn on the grounds, creating overnight accommodations for visitors who wanted to extend their experience, who'd pay premium rates to sleep on Vanderbilt land, even if not in the house itself. He created Christmas at Biltmore, transforming the holiday into a months-long event with themed decorations throughout the house, special evening tours, candlelight experiences that sold out weeks in advance at double normal admission prices, spring flower festivals, summer concerts on the lawn, fall harvest celebrations, any excuse to drive ticket sales, to give visitors reasons to return, to make Biltmore not just a one-time tourist stop, but a destination people visited repeatedly. The transformation was complete and total. Biltmore wasn't a home anymore. It was a brand, a lifestyle, a carefully managed commercial enterprise that happened to operate inside a historic house. The business employed MBAs, marketing directors, revenue analysts. They studied visitor patterns, optimized pricing strategies, A/B tested advertising campaigns. They expanded into weddings, couples paying 5 figures to marry in gardens designed by Olmsted. They created corporate event packages. They licensed the Biltmore name to products, candles, soaps, home goods that had nothing to do with the estate, but traded on its association with luxury and elegance. Today, over 1 million people visit annually. Admission costs $90 per adult in peak season. That's $90 million in ticket revenue alone, not counting wine sales, hotel stays, restaurant bills, gift shop purchases. The estate employs over 2,000 people. It's Asheville's economic engine, a tourism machine that generates hundreds of millions annually. And the house still stands, maintained by the revenue it generates, preserved by the people who pay to walk its halls. But preservation costs, constantly. A team of 40 works year-round on maintenance, fixing leaks, replacing rotted wood, cleaning stone, repairing plaster. The original slate roof requires constant attention. The limestone facade needs regular treatment to prevent erosion. The mechanical systems, upgraded repeatedly over decades, still fail and need replacement. Each winter brings new damage. Each summer, humidity threatens the art, the books, the tapestries George collected. The estate budgets millions annually just to prevent decay. Without tourist revenue, Biltmore would crumble. The math is simple. The house costs more to maintain than it produces in passive income. It survives only by selling itself over and over to visitors who pay for the privilege of witnessing excess. There's a darker math underneath. The original construction cost $5 million. In today's money, that's $189 million. Over Biltmore's 130-year existence, adjusting for inflation, the estate has consumed well over $1 billion in construction, maintenance, operation, and preservation costs. $1 billion. For a house, you could build 10 hospitals with that money, or 100 schools. You could fund research, infrastructure, services for entire communities. Instead, it bought a chateau in North Carolina where a man stored his book collection and held parties for people who already had everything. The workers who built it left no monuments. The servants who ran it have no memorials. The laborers who maintained it for decades earn no mention in the official histories. They're footnotes, if that, invisible people who made the spectacle possible. But the house endures. Tourists photograph the grand staircase. They post images on social media, marveling at the opulence, the craftsmanship, the sheer audacity of it all. They buy bottles of Biltmore wine, sleep in Biltmore hotels, eat in Biltmore restaurants, and the money keeps flowing. George Washington Vanderbilt II wanted a refuge from the world. He built a fortress of beauty, surrounding himself with art and books and architecture that whispered permanence. He believed wealth could buy insulation from reality, that if he built something grand enough, it would outlast him, validate him, prove that his life meant something beyond the money he inherited. He succeeded. The house survived. It became an icon, a symbol, a destination. But it survived by becoming exactly what George tried to escape: a commercial enterprise, a transaction, a place where people trade money for the illusion of touching greatness. Edith understood what George never could. She knew that beauty without purpose is just decoration, that grandeur without function is just waste. She turned his monument into a machine, his dream into a business. She saved Biltmore by admitting what it really was, not a home, but a product. And maybe that's the real legacy, not the chateau itself, but the transformation. The moment when private wealth became public spectacle, when family estate became tourist attraction, when legacy became revenue stream. The house stands because people pay to see it. The moment they stop paying, it starts dying. There's no sentimentality in that equation, just economics. Which means Biltmore's survival depends on maintaining the performance, the illusion that what visitors see is authentic, untouched, a window into how the Vanderbilts really lived. But every tourist who walks through dilutes that authenticity. Every dollar spent transforms history into entertainment. The question is whether that matters. Does it matter that the house survives as a museum rather than a home? That it's preserved for profit rather than use? That the story told on tours sanitizes the cost, smooths over the labor, makes the construction sound like an achievement rather than an exercise in excess? Or is preservation itself the point, keeping something beautiful alive, regardless of how or why? There's no easy answer, just the house, standing in the mountains, wrapped in December fog, doors open to anyone willing to pay. Inside, fires burn in fireplaces no one sits beside. Lights illuminate rooms no one sleeps in. A kitchen prepares food for staff and tourists, not family. The library holds George's books, but no one reads them. The bedrooms are staged, perfect, empty. It's a shell. Magnificent, yes. Historic, certainly, but a shell nonetheless. And perhaps that's fitting. George built Biltmore chasing something he couldn't name, permanence, meaning a legacy beyond money. He got permanence, but not the way he imagined. His house became eternal by becoming empty, preserved by becoming performance. Edith saved it by letting it go. She sold the land, opened the doors, allowed strangers to walk through her home, her husband's dream. She chose survival over purity, commerce over sentiment. The estate's current family continues that bargain. They maintain the house, expand the business, market the brand. Biltmore wine, Biltmore hotels, Biltmore experiences. The name means luxury now, a promise of quality and refinement. It sells. But underneath the brand, underneath the tourism, underneath the wine labels and hotel brochures, the original question remains: what was it all for? George spent $5 million and 6 years of construction to build a place he barely used. He lived there part-time, spent most of his year traveling, died before he could enjoy the permanence he purchased. The house outlasted him, but it outlasted him as a monument to waste, not achievement. The workers who built it went home to houses without electricity, without indoor plumbing, without heat beyond coal stoves. They built marble bathrooms for people who already had dozens of bathrooms elsewhere. They carved friezes and laid tile and polished brass for wages that barely fed their families. That labor made Biltmore possible. Not just possible, inevitable. Someone had to haul the limestone. Someone had to lay the brick. Someone had to mix the mortar and climb the scaffolding and work in winter cold and summer heat so George could have his chateau. Their names are lost. The estate's archives hold payroll records, incomplete and faded. Hundreds of names, recorded only because accounting required it. No stories, no photographs, no memorial, just names and numbers, recorded and forgotten. The official tours don't mention them. Guides talk about Hunt's genius, Olmsted's vision, George's refined taste. They describe the imported materials, the European craftsmen, the innovative systems. They marvel at the scale, the cost, the ambition. But the men who built it remain invisible, just as they were designed to be. That invisibility is the final cost. Not just the money, though that was obscene, not just the labor, though that was brutal, but the erasure, the careful editing of history to present grandeur without acknowledging its foundation. Biltmore's beauty is real. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, the architecture is stunning. None of that is false, but it's incomplete. A house doesn't build itself. Beauty doesn't appear through magic. Someone paid for it, and it wasn't just George writing checks. The workers paid in time, health, years of their lives spent building something they'd never own, could never afford to visit, wouldn't be remembered for creating. Their payment was survival. Wages just enough to keep going, to come back tomorrow, to build one more room in someone else's palace. That was the bargain. And they took it because it was the only bargain offered. Today, Biltmore employs thousands. Most make decent wages, receive benefits, work in conditions far better than the original builders. The estate treats its workers well by modern standards. It has to. Labor laws, unions, public scrutiny demand it. But the structure remains. A small group profits enormously from the labor of many. The Vanderbilt descendants still own Biltmore. They don't work there. They don't maintain it. They don't give tours or clean rooms or tend gardens. They own it, and ownership generates wealth. The people who do the actual work, the guides, gardeners, cooks, cleaners, they're paid wages. Fair wages, perhaps, but wages nonetheless. The distance between ownership and labor hasn't changed, just the numbers. And maybe that's the real history of Biltmore. Not the architecture or the art or the romance of a Gilded Age dream, but the persistence of a system where some people build and others own, where labor creates value that flows upward, where the distance between floors measures more than just height. George didn't invent that system. He inherited it, along with his fortune. He used it to build something beautiful because he could, because nothing stopped him, because in his world, wealth was permission and ambition was virtue. The house stands as evidence of what that system can produce. Extraordinary beauty, remarkable craftsmanship, a place that takes your breath away. But it also stands as evidence of what that system costs. The labor extracted, the resources consumed, the lives spent building someone else's dream. Both things are true, the beauty and the cost. The achievement and the exploitation, the wonder and the waste. Biltmore doesn't resolve that contradiction, it embodies it. And perhaps that's why it endures. Not despite the contradiction, but because of it. The house forces the question without answering it. Is this worth it? Is beauty justification enough? Does the grandeur redeem the cost? Every visitor decides for themselves. Some walk through awed, inspired, grateful that such places exist. Others walk through troubled, aware that every marble floor was laid by hands that never touched marble at home, that every chandelier was hung by workers who lived without electric light. Both responses are valid. Neither resolves the tension. The house stands in the mountains, fog rolling through the valleys below, smoke rising from fireplaces, lights glowing in empty rooms. Tourists come and go. Revenue flows. The estate persists. And somewhere in the archives, in boxes no one opens, payroll records from 1889 to 1895 list names. Hundreds of them. Men who built a chateau in North Carolina and then went home to live's history didn't record. They're still there, in the limestone they hauled, the brick they laid, the mortar they mixed. The house is their monument too, whether it acknowledges them or not. Every wall they built still stands. Every floor they laid still holds weight. Every window they installed still lets in light. They made this place. George paid for it, Hunt designed it, Olmsted landscaped it, but the workers made it, their hands, their backs, their years. And when you visit Biltmore, when you walk through those halls and marvel at the grandeur, you're walking through their work. The house wouldn't exist without them. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the legacy, not recognition, but permanence. Their work outlasted them. The thing they built survives. Or maybe it's not enough. Maybe a name on a plaque, a story told on tours, an acknowledgement of the hands that made beauty possible. Maybe that matters more than we admit. The estate could choose to tell that story. They could acknowledge the workers, name them if names survive, honor the labor that built this place. They could add that chapter to the official history, make it part of the tour, let visitors know that grandeur has authors beyond the architect and the owner. They haven't. And perhaps they won't, because that story complicates the narrative. It introduces questions the estate prefers visitors not ask. It suggests that beauty might not be enough, that preservation might require more than maintenance and marketing, that history includes the people who made it, not just the people who paid for it. Those questions don't sell tickets, they don't move wine, they don't book hotel rooms. So the tours continue, polished and perfect, emphasizing genius and taste and vision. They celebrate what was built without interrogating who built it or what it cost them. And Biltmore endures, beautiful and complicated, magnificent and troubling, a testament to what wealth can create and what it leaves out. In the end, the house is what it always was, a monument to a man who wanted permanence and got it by spending a fortune building something that requires a fortune to maintain. It survived by transforming into the opposite of what George intended, not a private refuge, but a public spectacle. Not a home, but a business. That transformation was survival. Edith saw no other path. Her descendants continue it because stopping means collapse, closure, decay. But survival by transformation is still loss. The house stands, yes, but what stands is a performance of history, not history itself. A carefully curated version of events, edited for palatability, optimized for revenue. The real history is messier, complicated, uncomfortable. It includes a man who inherited a fortune and spent it building a palace because he could, because no one told him no, because in his world wealth was justification enough. It includes workers who built that palace for wages that kept them poor, who labored in conditions we'd call exploitative today, but which were standard then, who left no trace beyond payroll records that no one reads. It includes a widow who saved the estate by opening it to the world, trading privacy for survival, legacy for commerce. It includes descendants who run it as a business because that's the only way it survives, who maintain the house by selling it to tourists who want to touch greatness for the price of admission. All of that is Biltmore's history. The beauty and the brutality, the art and the labor, the vision and the cost. And maybe the real question isn't whether the house should survive, but whether we can look at it honestly, seeing both what it represents and what it required, acknowledging both its magnificence and its foundation. Biltmore is worth seeing. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, the scale is breathtaking, the beauty is undeniable. But beauty isn't the whole story. It never is. The whole story includes the workers, the cost, the choices that made this place possible. The system that allowed one man to spend millions on a house, while others who built it struggled to survive. That story doesn't have a comfortable ending. It doesn't resolve neatly. It leaves you with questions, doubts, contradictions. But it's the true story, and truth, complicated as it is, matters more than comfort. The fog lifts from the Blue Ridge Mountains. Morning light breaks across limestone walls. Inside, rooms wait for the next tour. Fires lit, flowers arranged, everything perfect. Outside, beyond the gates, beyond the tourist parking and the gift shops and the winery, the mountains stretch for miles. Some of them were once George's. He sold them to stay afloat. Now, they're public land. Forests anyone can walk. Maybe that's the better legacy. Not the chateau, but the land. Not the private palace, but the public forest. Not what he kept, but what he couldn't hold. Biltmore stands because people pay to see it. The forest stands because it belongs to everyone. Which one matters more? You decide. That's the privilege of distance. We look back from a century away, weighing beauty against cost, judging choices made by people who saw the world differently than we do. But the house doesn't care about our judgments. It stands, indifferent, beautiful, expensive, demanding. It requires constant care just to prevent collapse. It consumes resources to preserve resources. It survives by being sold. And every December, when fog rolls through the mountains and lights glow in the windows, Biltmore looks exactly like what George wanted, a place where beauty insulates you from the world outside. But step inside, walk the halls, look close enough, and you'll see it's never been insulated at all. The world is built into every stone, every beam, every inch of it. The labor that laid the foundation, the money that paid for the art, the choices that shaped it, the compromises that saved it. The world is there whether we acknowledge it or not, and that's the lesson, if there is one. Beauty doesn't exist outside of context. Grandeur doesn't appear from nothing. Everything costs something. Someone always pays. At Biltmore, the beauty is real. So is the cost. Both things can be true. Both things are. The house stands in the mountains, waiting for the next visitor, the next tour, the next season. It will stand as long as people pay to see it, as long as the revenue flows, as long as the performance continues. And when the last tourist leaves, when the lights go out and the fires die and the rooms fall silent, what remains? A house. Empty, grand, expensive, beautiful, lonely, a monument to wealth, to ambition, to the belief that money could buy permanence, and a reminder that permanence isn't the same as meaning, that survival isn't the same as success, that beauty without cost is just another lie we tell ourselves. Biltmore is beautiful. That's not a lie. But it's not the whole truth either. The whole truth includes the workers in the basement, the servants in the attic, the laborers who built it and went home to houses without heat. It includes the hard choices Edith made to save it. It includes the transformation from home to business. It includes the money, always the money, flowing in and flowing out, keeping the machine running. That's Biltmore. Not just the chateau in the mountains, but everything underneath. The foundation no one sees. The cost no one counts. The history that doesn't fit the brochure. And maybe that's enough. Not a comfortable truth, but truth nonetheless. The house stands. The fog clears. Another day begins. And somewhere in the archives, names wait in ledgers, unread, unremembered, permanent in their own way. If you visit Biltmore, look close. Not just at the marble and the art and the grandeur. Look at the mortar between the stones. Look at the joints in the woodwork. Look at the places where hands touched, where labor made beauty possible. That's where the real history lives. In the details no tour mentions. In the work no plaque commemorates. It's there if you look for it. The whole story. Complicated, troubling, human. Worth seeing, worth knowing, worth remembering. Not despite the beauty, but because of it. Because beauty costs. And understanding the cost makes it real.